For him last week, there's a few of us guys that are still around that he started a class for 40 plus years ago, Pairs and Spares class, and the original, and it was a wonderful time to be with him and Miss Whitlock, and to have that kind of reunion for him. He was, like Dennis said, he was in tears most of the time, and then when it came time to teach the lesson, he shut it off and he went to work, and he did a good job. Did a good job. But I'm glad to see you guys here this morning. Thank Ronnie for allowing me to go down there and be part of that class last week. We got, guys, we've still got an extensive prayer list, as y'all know. I'm just going to be honest with you, folks. It's been a tough couple of weeks for us, hasn't it? We've got some people that we love and hold very dear to us who are hurting. First of all, I want y'all to pray for Brother Charner Franklin, loss of Miss Bobby last week. The services will be this Wednesday. Visitation Tuesday night, 5 to 7 at Roller Owen. The services will be at 11 o'clock at Roller Owen, and then burial will be out at the Veterans Memorial Gardens. So Susan's in town. He's been in town all week, and I know that Brother Charner is got a lot of family around him now, and that's very good. But in the next few days and weeks, let's check on Brother Charner, because they're going to have to go home, and it's going to be a lonely time. Brother Neil called me last night and said he thought it was going to rain a little bit this morning. Don't pick me up, Randy. So I know he's watching. He really enjoyed being back at church last week, and I'm sure y'all gave him a warm welcome. Remember Brother Neil, same situation. He continued to remember the Rice family, the loss of Charlene, and Angel's here. I got a text from Miss Judy Smothers this morning, guys. She's hurting again, and lift her up, please. I told her I'd get her on the prayer list this morning. Continue to remember Gene Crownover. Pam Howard has given us an update on baby Will, and he and his family desperately need our prayers. Phyllis Bailey Smith, ongoing cancer treatments. My cousin Kathy Hardy, continued cancer treatments. Pat Nips, Janelle Casey. I saw Miss Janelle here this morning. That's great. Guys, lift up my grandsons, Mike and Hayes. They're both sick little boys, and obviously, with that comes prayer need for the mom and dad, and so pray for them. They're having a tough time this weekend with those two guys. Jonna had posted on our group me to continue to remember her cousin. Been good to see Miss Ann here. We love you, Miss Ann. You and Rebecca, we're so glad you're out and about and getting to come to the services. I know you are too, and we'd love to see you here. But we continue to lift you up for further information and test results and all those things, okay? Big week for Maggie. Her last treatment, Dennis and I were just talking about that before class started. Becky and I were up there Friday night, took them some food, and I'll just be honest with you, Joe and Heather are bouncing off the walls. They're excited, and Maggie didn't come down, but she was... I know they're taking extra precautions this week, and I don't blame them. But she got to go home Saturday evening, and she goes back for her scan on Wednesday, and we're praying that bell rings, guys. Been a long road. But you know what? Talking with Joe and Heather the other night, there's so many blessings that family has experienced through this, too. She's ready to go back to school in January. Her boss has held her job all this time. It's amazing to see God work, isn't it? Rachel Nelson, this last week, lost her grandmother. Lift her and her family up, please. Angel, did you ever hear anything from the family that went to court this week? You asked for prayer.
Not really. A whole lot was accomplished.
Okay.
So I don't think the biological parents are making much progress.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Remember the family of Tori Moody, a young girl who passed away last week. Some of us know his dad and the family. Dennis, I know you've been over there, and I know others have talked to him. And I'm going to go ahead and announce this because if it did happen, it's a blessing. But I was told that Brian was saved, her dad, right after the weekend of finding out when she passed away, and I praise the Lord for that. The Beasties, continue to pray for them. The Rakes, Brother Steve's got several things going on. Please remember him. Remember Dennis and Tanya. And they've had kind of a busy week as well. And I believe we're moving tomorrow. And let's remember Miss Thomas with this move and this change. And we all know some of us know how difficult it is to be in that situation. And we lift you guys up, Dennis. And the McGugans. Becky? We're praying for the McGugans. Okay. Anybody got prayer requests or updates you want to give me? I talked to LaDonna earlier in the week, and she said she was hoping that this was the last week of her boot. So hopefully I said that correctly. And if you're watching, LaDonna, you can call me and chew me out after service is over. Y'all don't realize that I do get calls after service is over with corrections, suggestions, criticisms, and all those things. Sometimes, yeah, David, you're right.
Dudley and I went up to my sister's on Friday, and Bob is not doing well.
Okay.
I think she has not been as open with me as maybe I just didn't get it, but he's in bad shape.
Okay. We'll lift up Bob and Janet as well. Okay, thank you, David. Okay. Okay. All right.
And then my friend Teresa.
Yes.
Her tomorrow, so we can keep her in prayer.
Yes. Thank you. Others? Okay. We have a missionary who's going to be speaking for us today, and I'm not even going to try to say his name. I will wait to see if he says his name right. But he and his family will be with us today, and y'all pray for him as he comes before us.
He's been in Awanas. He's a really...
I understand that, but I still can't say his name. Yeah, Mr. T.
With a C.
Huh?
Coffee long.
Oh, I thought it was a K.
Or K.
See, you don't know.
See, I know how to say it. I just didn't know it.
Regardless of that, we're going to lift him up. God knows who he is. God has already told him what he's going to give us, okay? And, all right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Ricky, would you open it for us, please?
Father, thank you again for the privilege this morning to come to your house, Father. Thank you, Father, for being able to gather. Father, hear your word. Father, I pray that you'll open our hearts and our minds this morning. Father, keep us humble. Keep us always aware of those that are in our circle, Father, those that are hurting, those that are going through the deals of life and taking treatments and things of that nature, Father. I just pray you'll hold them up, to be with the doctors, to be with the families. Father, I pray for all the leaders of this church, Father, that you'll give them what they need to share from your word, Father, that we can. Father, I just pray that you'll forgive my sins and ask it all in thy name.
Amen. Okay. Well, I talked to Ronnie last week, and I talked to him a couple of times last week, and he said he was talking to me about the lesson he was going to bring about Deborah, and he talked about everything he had beforehand on Deborah, and he told me last Sunday that he didn't get to Deborah. So, no, he didn't get. He said he did. I listened to it. He said he didn't get there, and he was right. He didn't. But he spent a lot of time with you guys talking about what was going on with the children of Israel. And our Sunday school book even said in the very beginning paragraph, it said this is a very, very dark time for Israel. But it's a dark time Because why? Why is it a dark time? I mean, God's still on his throne, right?
Disobedience.
Bottom line, I almost, just like us. I mean, would you say that we're living in a dark time? I mean, goodness gracious. Got election coming up. You got people who are two opposing forces that are going against each other right now with the country, that there's so much hate. We have allowed, in America, we have allowed sin to enter into so many households and so many homes and so many families and so many churches. It's a dark time right now, just like what Israel was facing. And what Israel did in the book of Judges, you'll see the common thread is they'll be up here and they'll have a judge that has been called to lead them, and they'll be doing really good, and then they'll be down in the valley. This young man, Gideon, says in the Bible that he was the least of his family. Dennis and I were talking about that. Dennis said he was the least of his family because, his brother Larry can do everything. Danny's got license and works for the government and does this. Dennis can't do nothing. But this first verse that we're going to read, this common thread first verse that we're going to read for this book and these people, it starts out with these tough words. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. Over and over and over you see this. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you where we were reading, did I? Judges chapter 6, verse 1. Over and over and over through the book of Judges, you see this phrase, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. The children of America did evil in the sight of the Lord. I mean, we could fit that right in there, right? And each time, this loving, benevolent, now this God is judgmental. This God will judge them. He will punish them, but He loves them. So there's a chance for us too, isn't there? We find this guy named Gideon who is, I said earlier, he's the youngest, the smallest of his family. But God has got a way of taking anybody, no matter how meek and mild they may be, no matter what kind of life they have, but no matter what kind of money they've got, no matter what kind of prestige they have, He's got a way of taking someone like that is meek and mild and turning them into something mighty. And the reason that happens is because only God could do that. I think about, did I ever tell you how much I like history? I think about Abraham Lincoln. Just think about this with me. Here's a young boy who lives in the backwoods of Kentucky, uneducated, loses his mother, who was the real star of his life. The only thing he had going in his dad was cruel. Loses his mother at a very young age. And he, not alone, with the help of his God, gets a hold of books and he studies and he learns and he teaches himself. And I believe that God was with him every step of the way to put him in the position that he ended up in. You look up, you Google on your phone top leaders of all time, and Abraham Lincoln, without a doubt, is in every list. But that only happens because God did it. God worked through him. God brought him along. And we're going to see that God's going to do the same thing for this little young guy named Gideon. Verse 11 says, "And there came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak, which is in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezrite. And his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites." First of all, let me make you understand something here. It said in that first verse that God put them under the control of the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were a powerful, powerful group of people who still laid claim to part of the promised land that Israel had already supposed to have taken, already possessed it. They had powerful rulers. They had even worked with some of the rulers of Israel to sabotage Israel. The guy's name was Balaam, and he worked behind the scenes to bring them down. They were under the control of this powerful, powerful people, but they were ungodly people. And the problem is Israel had a bad habit of always mingling. Now, when I say mingling with ungodly people, what do you think I mean by that? Not only did they at times fail and slip away and start listening and praising some of their gods, they intermarried. One common thread through the Old Testament, guys, time and time and time again, God always told His people, do not intermarry with ungodly people. And time again, they always did it. And it was always one of the downfalls of Israel. And that had been going on for years. God allowed them to come under their control because He was angry with them. This young boy is working at the wine press, and he's threshing wheat. How many, Debbie, you probably threshed wheat before in your days.
Right beside you.
Yeah. I did. I showed her. She was my apprentice. I don't know a whole lot about threshing wheat, but I do know it sounds like something you want to do outside. Because I have seen, Ricky, you and I both know when we've seen them guys cutting wheat, what it looks like out there with their big fancy equipment and all that. It's a dust storm, guys. And they thresh this wheat like that. They literally thresh it, and they separate the good stuff from the bad stuff, and the bad stuff blows away. He's doing it inside. It says in the Bible that Gideon was inside the building threshing wheat. He was hiding. And there's a lot of more talented people than I am who've written lots of things on Gideon, and some of them said that he was hiding and he was a coward. I don't know that I always agree that he was a coward. I think he was just a young boy, inexperienced. He didn't know everything he was to know yet. I can lay claim to that myself in a lot of ways in my life, that I was a little timid in some areas because I didn't know or was unsure. It says that this angel came, and he's talking, and he's about to talk to Gideon. And in verse 12 he says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor." That doesn't even go with what I just told you, does it? Thou mighty man of valor doesn't even fit with this young boy who's hiding, threshing wheat. God's about to do something major in this boy's life. And I want to stop here just for a second and talk about some of the people in this room. I have seen some people in this room grow to be mighty men and mighty women. So many of you are teachers. So many of you are mighty prayer warriors. So many of you have taught children's church since you were 2 with my wife, who was 4. So many of you have worked tirelessly in your church and in your family. Miss Shirley, it amazes me at how many kids you've taught that's come through this church. Same thing with Debbie. And some of you are doing that now, teaching these kids that have come through our church. Some of you have witnessed and brought people to the Lord. And the thing that I'm bringing this up for is I know where you came from. For the most part, I know where you came from. It wasn't that you had a lot of money. It wasn't that you had a huge, high degree of education. Maybe you did. None of that counted because God got a hold of you. God moved in your life. God pushed you along. Becky told me not too long ago that when she, and that coffee looks good, when she first approached me at Northeast High School, this is going to get good, Ricky. She thought I was 2 or 3 years older than I was. I wasn't even driving yet. I was driving, but I wasn't supposed to be driving. And that's what tricked her. But she paid me a very high compliment. And she said, I never thought that you would be the man that you turned out to be. And I can look around the room and see men and women, and I can say the same thing about you. When God's in control, when God does it, you're going somewhere. Now, you may not be the pastor of a church, but you're still going somewhere. This young boy is about to take a trip that he didn't even realize that he was capable of doing. He's going to be a leader of an army. And not only that, he's going to be a leader of an army who is victorious against all odds. And I stopped and I said that about the people in this room because you are here because God is in your life and you've beat the odds too. You've won a mighty victory. Because, Ricky, I could be a lot of other places. I could be doing a whole lot of other things. But you could too. But you let God stay in control. You let God steer the ship. You let God talk to you. You listen to God. And I respect you for it. I respect you very deeply for it. Verse 13 said, after he's called a mighty man of valor, you got to remember that he came from the tribe of Manasseh, and they were also known. Most of them were known as mighty men of valor, and the angel is paying attention to that. In verse 13, and Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then have this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us out from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. And the Lord looked upon him and said, go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? He starts going back. You remember a few weeks ago we talked about the history lesson that Joshua gave Israel to boost their confidence and remind them. Here's this young man who is standing there called a mighty man of valor, and you are going to go and lead an army against the Midianites. And he said, well, oh my Lord, where have you been? Is this the same God that brought us out of Egypt? And you've turned around and handed us into the Midianites? Have we not ever said basically the same thing? Lord, look what you've done, and all these things you've done in my life. And then the one time we run into a rough patch, or not the one time, we run into several, don't we? But as soon as we run into a rough patch, let's put it like that, we wonder, well, you're the God that did all this. Why am I here now? Why am I dealing with this now? Have you ever done that? Do you think it's okay to do that? I want to hear from you. Do you think it's okay to talk to God that way? Yeah, I agree with you. I think for first and foremost, If you're asking God why, you are communicating with Him. And that's the key. That's what He wants. Yeah. He wants to hear from you. He puts you in that situation so He would hear from you. Right? But we do it time and time again, just like Gideon's saying here. He said, look, God, this is the God that I've been told by my fathers that did all these wonderful things, but yet You've allowed us to be here under the control of the Midianites. And I can look around this room and we can go through that whole scenario again of people who would say, Lord, look what You've done. And Miss Ann is sitting here today. She's been in a tough patch here. And Rebecca. And all of us can go through this. You guys can go through this. I can go through that same scenario in our lives that we say, God, You're a mighty God, and I've served You. I've listened to You. I've obeyed You. But yet here I am in this terrible spot. He wants to hear from us. He wants us to question. He wants us to ask why. I'm not talking about trying to get after God here. Let's don't cross that line. But He does want to hear from us, and He wants us to know. The only way we're going to know is if we talk to Him. And I believe that in these situations, when we talk to Him, He's going to give us an answer. Verse 15. And He said unto him, O my Lord, where thou shalt save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least of my father's house. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as what? One man. See, he talked to God. He asked Him those questions, and God immediately responded to him and said, this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it, and you're more than capable, and you just don't know it yet. I'm going to use you to smite the Midianites. This young lady that passed away, Tori, last Sunday night. And then I hear that her dad was saved after that. You see where I'm going with this? I see that this young girl passed away for a reason. It's not a reason that we, sitting in here today, understand. We won't understand it until we see Jesus. But because of that, God moved in this man's life. Not just for the sorrow, but He gave him peace through salvation because of what just happened in his life. And that's what God's talking about here. I'm in this. I'm in control of this. You are going to do this. I'm going to use you, and I'm going to use not only you, but I'm going to use situations around you for my will to be done. And we question a lot of times, guys, just like this Tori Moody situation. We question, why God, why? Why this young girl? Why now in her life? Why take her the way You did? Maybe it was so her dad would be saved. Maybe so it would be for others to come to Christ. And maybe it's so we could use this as an example in this Sunday school lesson this morning. Because I don't know about you guys, but I'll remember that. There's a lot of things I won't remember, but I'll remember that. This story, Debbie, I know you've taught this story time and time and time again in children's church to these kids. But there's one thing that Gideon does here through this process is he's still not sure, right? He's still not sure. He's hearing what God's saying. He's heard what the great promise is of what's going to happen with the Midian army. But he's still weak. And I challenge you to say that you're not the same way. And so Gideon gives God a couple of challenges, doesn't he? Debbie, you're up. Talk about the fleece, would you?
Well, Gideon said, I need you to show me for sure.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted a sign from God, you know.
Don't we all?
Yeah, true. So he put out, I'll get them backwards. But
That's
he put
okay.
out the fleece and said, let the ground be wet and the fleece be dry.
Mm-hmm.
And God made that happen.
Yeah.
And then he just had to double check.
He still wasn't sure.
Still wasn't sure. I think he was just, he was scared.
Sure. Put yourself in his place, which we could do throughout the Bible with all these people we talk about. But put yourself in this young boy's place. I mean, he's not even a grown man like you, Clint. He's a kid. I got some kids that work for me. They're such good boys, but they're idiots. And because of that, I love them to death. You know, because they call me Mr. Randy.
You like that?
I do. I don't like it for age. I like it because I'm the boss. They call me Mr. Randy, and you'll say, "Hey, Garrett, go." And Garrett's got long, bushy hair that sticks out under his hat, and his hat just floats on top of his head. Sweet kid. Garrett, go to the garage and get the battery charger and pull it in it. He'll leave, and I won't see him for 20 minutes. I have to go find Garrett. He's trying to find the garage, let alone. But that reminds me of Gideon. George is the other guy I got working for me. He spells his name Jorge, not Jorge. George. He speaks better English than I do. He's real quiet and reserved, but he's an idiot too. But they try. They're willing to try. I see Gideon is maybe at this point with the fleece willing to try, but I need just a little bit more of a sign. I'm going to lay this fleece out. What is fleece? Sheep wool. I'm going to lay it out on the ground, and in the morning when I get up, God, I want this to be dry and the ground to be wet with dew. God did it. God did it. And so he's thinking about it, and he says, you know what? That's good, God. That's a good one. But I just want to, like Debbie said, I just want to double and triple check. First of all, I want to make sure you got the right guy. Right?
Don't be mad at me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Don't be mad at me, but I just want one more shot at this. So then tomorrow I want the ground to be dry and the fleece to be wet. God did it. Now, for you and I sitting here today, we would sit here and say, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good proof, right? Isn't it? I guarantee you, without a shadow of a doubt, each one of us would be trying for a third and fourth time. I know I would. Let's move on to something else a little bigger, God, than just fleece. That's what I'd be trying to say. God is steadily having to convince this young man, I got this. I got this. And I'm bringing you along with me. Again, in our rough patches, he tells us the same thing. Now, for me, guys, when I get in a rough patch, I want to hear that on the front end. I don't want him to wait till about halfway through the rough patch to start telling me he's got this. There's a thing called faith that we got to deal with here. We got to have the same faith on the front end of these rough patches as we do at the end of these rough patches. There's the problem. There's where we get weak. But we're going to move on in our scripture here. He's trying God out, making sure, first of all, I've been there, hadn't you? God, you sure you talking to, this is Randy Rogers with a G, not a D. Are you sure you got the right guy? Chapter 7, verse 2. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that thou art with thee are too many for me to give them to the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. This is a pretty cool part of this story too, folks. Not only did he give him God's power to be the leader, he gave him the ability. Gideon finally gets it, and he starts broadcasting across the land, I need soldiers. He starts drafting people from everywhere. And Ricky, we had a brotherhood meeting that I gave a little short devotional to, and if you'll remember, some of you guys were there, I said there's a difference between being drafted into the army and volunteering for the army. So Gideon sends out the word to all the people around. I need men. We're going to go up against the Midianites. I need you to send me men, send me horses, send me arms, send me everything you can. And he gets an army that's how much? 135,000 men? 135,000 men ready to fight with Gideon. Did God tell him to do that? If you look through the scriptures, frontwards, backwards, and behind them, but when you get to this part, you don't see anywhere in there that God says, I want you to go out to all the tribes and gather all these. He didn't say that. So all of a sudden, again, Gideon is a lot like us. Well, if I'm going to be in charge, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. If I'm the one God has chosen, I'm going to do it this way, and I know what I'll do. I'll get a huge army together. That's the ticket. God never told him to do that.
That reminds me of like when we have a problem, instead of going to God and asking God, what do we need to do?
Mm-hmm. God's not through testing him yet. God allows him to gather this army. And I believe that God allowed him to gather this huge army so that he could teach him yet another lesson. God says, okay, here's what we're going to do, guys, and I'm going to abbreviate this. When we get to the brook, when we get down to the brook to gather water, Gideon, I want you to pay attention. When you see the men kneel down to drink water, if they put their face in the stream and start drinking directly out of the water, send them home. But if they dip the water with their hand and they're looking around while they drink, that means they're alert. They can still be alert to danger. The ones that put their face in the water, anything can happen to them because they're not watching, they're not paying attention. You keep those. How many men did he end up with? Out of 135,000? 300.
Grown men are idiots too.
I knew you'd be the one to say that. God taught a valuable lesson here. Those men that were there in that army, some of them were draftees and some of them were volunteers. I go back to the Civil War, and 90% of them, those armies that were put together were draftees. And when the first sign of battle came, they would turn and run. But the ones who volunteered paid attention. They were ready to run into the fight. They fought from the heart. Right or wrong, whichever side you want to be on, right or wrong, they fought from the heart because they volunteered. And these 300 men who drank from their hands, I consider them volunteers, ready to do battle, ready to go. But here's the other crazy thing about it. Now, let's get into these next few verses, and I got to hurry. Judges chapter 7, 16 through 22. It says, and he divided the 300 men that Gideon had left. He divided the men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand with an empty pitchers and lamps with the pitchers. Do what now? If I'm Gideon, I'm standing there thinking, okay, God, I had 1,000 men. You whittled me down to 300, and now you're going to give them a piece of pottery, a lamp, and a trumpet. Are you sure you're still talking to the right guy? Because I'm telling you right now, this army that they're facing, first of all, there's no way 300 men are going to take them. Second of all, there's no way you're going to take 300 men. You wouldn't take them with 135,000 men with spears and arrows. And I've got pitchers and torches and trumpets. Why has God done this to Gideon? Why has God whittle down his numbers. First he called him, then he put him in place of leadership. He answered all Gideon's questions. He gives him he lets him gather his own army, and then he whittles it down to 300, and then he tells them they're going to fight with these things. Why has God done all this? That's the only way it's going to happen right there. There's no way that this battle that hasn't been won yet is going to be won with these odds. No way. There's no way. I remember when Angel, how long ago has it been since you passed out at the house?
My seizures,
Yeah.
Izzy had just been a week old. So 13 years.
Yeah.
14 years almost.
I know Ricky. Ricky came home and found Angel. I know that there's no way that Angel is sitting here today unless God put her here in that situation. I talked to Ricky at the hospital that evening, and he's like, man, when you come in and see your wife in this situation, nothing helps but prayer. And God took that situation into His own hands, not Ricky's hands, not the doctor's hands, in His own hands, and here she sits today. There's so many things that go on in our lives, guys, that there's no way we get through this without God. Not going to happen. The odds are against us. It doesn't make sense. But here we are. Here we are. You see, there's a little part of this story that I'm not sure if I remember if it's even covered in this lesson or not. He sends those guys down there close to the camp, and they listen to what's going on in the camp. Even though they know that this army that Gideon has is out there, they're already talking amongst themselves. This is the ungodly. They're talking amongst themselves about, we've heard a lot about this God. We've heard a lot about these people who God blesses. Are we going to be able to handle this? God knows the story long before it's told. He goes on, and I'm going to speed through this. He goes on, and they come into the camp, and they have the torches hid under the pitchers so they can't see the light. And they divide into 3 companies. There's 300 men, so 100 men in each company. I'm glad Ryan's here to hear me get the math right. Not here to hear me get the math right. They divide up and they surround this camp with 100 in each group. And at the right moment, they blast those trumpets. Shock and awe. Shock and awe. These men who were already scared of this group of people, I wouldn't even call it an army, but they were afraid of this group of people. God put that fear in their lives. See, God is working on the victory at every level, in every situation. And God even uses the ungodly in His victory. And then what do? They take those torches, they crash, they make the smashing sound with breaking those pitchers, and the light shows up. 300 men take down this mighty army because half of them killed each other in fear.
They thought they were surrounded.
They thought they were surrounded by this huge army, and they started running. And sometimes in the dark, they would be confused as to this guy's on my team. No, he's not. Panic. I said all that just to prove to you that no matter what the situation is, if God says it, it's going to be done. And here's the thing, guys, you can come along with Him if you want. But when you come along with Him, you better be ready. Because you're going to see some things that you're going to say, this is not possible. God's so many steps ahead of us. He put fear in that other army that these guys didn't even know they had. He scared them and conquered that whole army with 300 men with a trumpet, a torch, and the sound of breaking glass. If He can do that, what is there that He can't do? Comments?
Well, they also cried the sword of the Lord and Gideon.
Mm-hmm.
So, those guys that were a little bit scared when they saw all the
Yeah.
lights around them got a whole lot scared
Mhm.
when they heard that.
The key is that they knew the history of Israel.
Right.
They knew what Israel had been through and what their God had already done for them. God planted that in their minds. Okay. Thank y'all for being here today. Y'all pray for the pastor, the preacher that's going to be before us this morning, Brother Kay. Pray for him. Huh? Yeah. Brother Kay, I'm sure he's got a lot he can bring to us this morning with his work in the Philippines. And I saw where he was a missionary in Honolulu or somewhere like that at first. I'm like, man, where you going? What's wrong with you? You leaving Hawaii to go to Philippines? God had other plans for him. That's what's wrong with him.
And now he's here?
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's stand if you can.